Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the first webinar in our virtual service delivery. My name is Eva Rivera. I am with the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, and I'm really excited to see all of you here today. Just a few announcements and a couple of housekeeping items. We are broadcasting this webinar in Spanish, so you are able to choose the Spanish translation, and we are also offering closed captioning for those participants who choose to turn that on. Again, I'm really happy to be with all of you today. This is a very exciting time for us to be able to come together from all different sectors across the country and share in the work that we're doing in the service of children and families. We are participating and collaborating with very, very many sectors across the country, as I mentioned. So we have early care and education providers, pediatrics, home visiting, and we're really excited to learn together and grow in our work, especially as we're working with children and families in a virtual world. So I want to thank you all for the work that you are doing with children and families every single day. And I also want to thank our generous community who is making these webinars possible for all of us today. To tell you a little bit about who we are at Brazelton Touchpoint Center, the Brazelton Touchpoint Center was founded, or BTC as we know it at home, was founded more than 20 years ago by Dr. T. Barry Brazelton, who is a world-renowned pediatrician whose groundbreaking research changed how generations around the world think of and care for children and babies. We are part of Boston Children's Hospital, and we partner with family-facing providers across disciplines and sectors to ensure that all children grow up to be adults who can strengthen their communities, constructively participate in civic life, and steward our planet resources, as well as cope with adversity and experience the joy of nurturing the next generation. Today, I really want to get to know some of you and also share what we're going to be doing together. This conversation is about strength-based approach to working with families in a virtual context. So we know we are living in a world today where everything we're doing seems to be virtual. So we really want to think today about how do we use the strength-based approach to do that work and engage with children and families, as well as get to hear from voices from the field regarding the application of their work and using the strength-based approach. In addition, we're going to do a poll right now and hear from you all. We want to know which field of practice do you work in? So there's a couple options right now. You should see a poll. So tell us a little bit about what your professional role is. And you might fall into a couple of different sectors, but choose the one that best seems to fit today. And we'd love to hear from you. So take a moment and answer the poll. All right, so as we're closing the poll, it looks like the majority of our participants today are from the early childhood education field. We also have early intervention, child welfare, family support, and healthcare. So it's great to have you all here. Again, thinking across sectors and really seeing the connection that we have. We are all working with children and families, and a lot of us, our work intersects. And so how do we, as providers who are working with these families, how do we make the connections? How do we see across models and fields and practices to really connect with the children and families that we're working with? So I know you're all interested to hear from our panelists today. We have three amazing individuals who are dedicating their day-to-day work to children and families. Dr. Dewana Thompson, who is with the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, will start our conversation today. Cristina Castaneda, who is a family support specialist at Educare Los Angeles in Long Beach, will share some of her perspective and experience in working with children and families at Educare. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Nicole Faison, who is representing families that she works with at Healthy Families America in Rhode Island. So we are super excited to hear from them. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Thompson, who will start us off in this conversation today.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are logging in from. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Thank you, Eva, so much for introducing us. And we just really want to delve into talking about this topic of taking a strength-based approach in working with families. We want to start off talking about perspectives and really getting us all to be in a space and thinking about how do we take a strength-based approach. You know, in family engagement, we often talk about building relationships with families, and no one really tells us how to do that. It can be so challenging to the how behind it. And we have a lot of strategies that we use, you know, to form relationships with families, but sometimes it can be a little difficult in how to actually form those relationships and how to maintain them. And so in thinking about taking a strength-based approach, it really allows us an opportunity to be very intentional about the way that we build relationships with families. So the first thing we want to start off with when you're taking a strength-based approach is we want to think together about perspective. So what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you hear the word perspective? And we want you to use your chat. I know there's a lot of us on here, but just use your chat to be able to put in, when you think of the word perspective, what do you think about? What comes to mind? Oh, thank you. I see point of view, insight, outlook, opinion, self-images, life experiences. Open-mindedness, absolutely. Thinking about your point of view. Thinking about how you can see things differently. So these are great. Oh, someone said a cultural lens and cultural experiences. Our frame of reference. Absolutely. All of these are wonderful. So when we think about perspective, it really allows us to do all of those things, to really think about how do I view the world? How does the world view me? What is our viewpoint? And I love this image of the image in the mirror being very different than the one that is in reality, right? So as we think about perspective taking, we have in our minds to be able to take a shift. And that shift is from being prescriptive to taking perspective. When you see on the next slide, we have to really think intentionally about being prescriptive. Prescriptive means that we impose. We often impose the way that we think and our perspective, all of the things that you all wonderfully said in the chat. Your point of view is your point of view. And when you prescribe, you really impose your way of being, your way of thinking, because it's your view. Taking that shift into perspective taking really makes us think about, on the next slide, you'll see awareness of self and having an awareness of others. So first I have to think about, who am I? What do I bring to this interaction with a family? How am I viewing a situation? And then also considering, how does the person that I'm dealing with, what is their point of view? How are they thinking? What's their cultural lens that they're seeing this through? And we all have different lenses, right? We all bring our own lens. If I took Eva's glasses and put them on, I would see something totally different than what I would see without my glasses on, right? So that's one way to think about perspective. I need to wear glasses. I'm in denial. So maybe I might see clearer, Eva, if I wore your glasses. But I think that oftentimes we forget that perspective taking can be so important just in terms of the way that we do this work and really considering the culture in which we bring to the interaction.
Dewana, there's a question in the chat here that's making me think about this awareness of self, and also thinking about how working with families virtually might impact our perspective. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about to that point, and help perhaps get us all thinking about that idea that that adds on possibly a different layer and another point of view that we might need to consider. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So as we're working virtually, we're literally coming into families' homes, right? We're literally coming into their world of being and seeing firsthand their life. We're seeing their surroundings, we're seeing their environment, and we're seeing them in a different way than we have before. It can be a little challenging at times for us to really take perspective when we're working with families virtually. There's a lot, and our panelists are going to talk a bit to this, but just trying to even get in contact with families, trying to connect with families, really thinking about how can I connect with a family, via this video stream that we're doing right now. How can I really build a relationship with a family when I'm having to just talk to them on the phone? And body language is so important in some of the work that we do. It's so difficult for us to not be able to actually be with people. You know, we're providers, many of us, and it adds an entire new just purview, and having to take perspective and really thinking about what is this family going through right now? You know, how is this for them? We have so many families with the digital divide in terms of how is it for them to be with me on a camera, and the exposure that they have to have for you coming into their space in a very different way, right? So for those of you that are like home visitors, or those of you that are used to going into families' homes, that can be something that, yes, that family is very used to you doing that, but it can be very, very different for providers who we talk to, like physicians, for example, pediatricians or nurse practitioners, or even educators who are having to have video conferences with families in a way that wasn't done before. And understanding the family's perspective and maybe some of their hesitation to do that could be very, very challenging.
Absolutely, and I also think there was another comment in the chat that happened that now it's not just coming into people's homes. We might be used to going, as you mentioned, home visitors. That's what we do. However, now it's on both sides, right? Like now they also have a glimpse into our own lives, our own perspectives, our own world, and so that might possibly create a shift and create some new opportunities, but also new challenges that we had never had to encounter before. Right?
Absolutely. And thinking about that and perspective taking, and really considering what the family that you're working with is going through, what the child is going through, and what you as a provider are going through, and having to be at a level of vulnerability in being in this virtual world that we've all found ourselves in right now. So I want us to think together a little bit more about this thought of perspective. I want you to use the chat again and tell me, what do you see when you see this picture?
We're getting a lot of two faces. Oh, somebody said communication, Dewana.
Oh.
Two faces, a goblet. Two faces seems to be a very popular response.
A goblet, a chalice.
Wow, the chat is, yes, it's really going fast. Yeah, we're getting a lot of two faces.
So for those of you that see the two faces, now that we pointed out that there is a goblet, people are seeing a goblet. Someone said an hourglass. Can you also see that? Someone said connection.
There was also another comment of connection or reflection. Some people can see both, the faces and the goblets. So
I want you to think for a moment, when you first saw this, whatever it was that you saw, whether it was connection, whether it was the two faces, whether it was the goblet or the chalice, think about how did you see the other perspective or the other image when someone else mentioned it? Or were you able to see it on your own? Did you immediately see the other perspective, the chalice or the goblet or the hourglass? So now some saying, oh, I saw it both. Some are saying, oh, I see it now, after someone named it. Exactly. So sometimes that's exactly what happens with perspective taking. Sometimes we can see the other person's perspective. Sometimes you can see the other view. Some say, I saw it immediately. Oftentimes we have to take what we call perspective taking. And when you take perspective taking, it really allows you to think about the other person's lens. So the capacity to sense someone else's thoughts and feelings, the ability to empathize with another. And then it often requires reflection. And some of you may have just experienced that in that brief moment of seeing something one way, and then it took for someone else to share their perspective, their point of view with you in the chat or as I'm speaking, for you to see a different perspective. So as we go through perspective taking, we have this cycle that we share with you. And it's a cycle as we're thinking about perspective taking, we want to be strength-based. We want to think about, go alongside a family and think about, I wonder what this family is going through. And we're using the example of virtual visits, right? To talk with families. What's their perspective right now? So you reflect on your own. You take perspective of yourself. You take perspective of the family. Then you think about what influences do I bring to my perspective? What influences does the family bring? So influences can be things like your culture, your upbringing, your personal experiences, your ethnicity, your religion, your gender orientation. All of these things can really influence the way that you think and the way that you view the world. And what we know to be true is that these things guide our interactions with families. These things also, if we don't take this approach of being taking perspective, it can lead to what we call about implicit bias. When you don't recognize what things you actually bring to your interaction with family. So taking perspective can be so important in thinking about what influences the way, just in looking at that picture that we just saw, what influence in your life influenced you to see the faces as opposed to the goblet, right? It could be your past experiences with a goblet. It could be your past experiences with seeing something similar to this. There's a lot that goes into it. And so therefore, when we really want to be strength-based in our approach to dealing with families, this is the cycle of perspective taking that we like to use. Reflect on my own perspectives as I'm taking perspective. Think about the influences that influence everything that I'm bringing to this interaction with a family, and that will help to guide my interactions with families. And I'm going to quickly share with you breaking these three of these down in a way that can help you as you do this work with your families, and particularly while we're doing it virtually. The first thing, and when we're reflecting, is what we want to recognize what we bring to the interaction. So many things are influenced, if you see on the next slide, influence what we bring to an interaction with family. our ideas, our expectations. Someone mentioned in the chat our biases, our emotions. These reflections influence your attitudes, they influence your interactions with families, and they influence your ability to be strength-based with a family, right? So as we're thinking, the expectation that I have for a family to be present virtually, if I'm needing them to log on and get online with me and I need them to be there, if they don't meet that expectation, then that leads to me having ideas about why they didn't do that. That may be even influenced by my biases that I have. The next thing we really want to think about is recognize what you bring when you're doing your reflection and taking perspective. And on the next slide, you'll see that what the second thing that we want to do is take perspective of all of the people that we're interacting with. So the child, the family, and the provider. If you look on the next slide, you can see that we really want to think about all of these perspectives. Children bring their own wonderful perspective into the relationship that we have with them when we're doing virtual visits, virtual conversations, phone conversations, texting families during this virtual time. As our panelists will tell us, there's so many different factors that come into play, and there's so many emotions, particularly now during this COVID crisis and the mini crisis that we're dealing with in our society, that families are bringing. They have their own lens. And so considering those are so important. And absolutely, they have so much on their plate, as we do as providers. And so considering all of those things is important. So as we take perspective, there's a moment for us to, I'll use the example of a family maybe not logging in, or it's being very difficult for you to be in touch with them, or them not following through with something that you may have asked them to do, right? When an expectation isn't met in particular, we can make all kinds of assumptions, right? We have an attitude, we make meaning of why that hasn't happened. And so in some instances, it's really, really easy for us to think about that challenge and go to the negative and think, oh, this family doesn't care, or oh, this family, has so much to deal with, this just isn't a priority, just to give you two examples. But on the next slide, the thing that we want to encourage us all to do is to choose a strength-based attitude. One of those could be, all families have strengths. So instead of immediately going to the negative, let's have a positive lens when we're taking perspective and saying, wow, a lot of families I'm working with do have a lot to deal with. And even though they're not showing me right now that they have strength, I'm going to believe that they do. And I'm not going to make it so that they have to prove to me that they have strength. I'm going to make it so that I believe that they have strength. And I'm going to open the door and go alongside them to let those strengths that they have emerge. And that is a strength-based attitude. When you really believe that every family has strength, even when it's difficult to find them. Going alongside the family and letting the family show you what those strengths are. So in sum, using a strength-based approach allows us to recognize what you bring to an interaction, your biases, your influences, your perspective, your upbringing. You consider the family member's perspective, and then you choose the strength-based mindset or an attitude. And you believe it, not necessarily because the parent has or family has shown you that they have all of these wonderful strengths, because 9 times out of 10, if they're working with you, and especially in a case where they've been referred to you for a reason that's not so strength-based, they not necessarily are showing those, but you go alongside them and you're able to help them see their own strengths and for you to see them as well.
Absolutely. Dewana, there's a couple questions that have come up, and I know that the work that we're doing might be very similar in some respects, but there are also some challenges that might be coming up. And so I'm thinking about, in terms of, meeting with families virtually, can you think of any special strategies? And this is going to be a question that's going to come up next in the poll, is as we've been having this conversation so far, what are some things that really stand out? Perhaps some things that, you know, you can speak to that, you know, we do most days in the office visit that we could possibly translate into the work that we're doing virtually. So I know you mentioned like choosing that attitude, right? But is there anything else that you might be able to share with us that could help us take what we know and apply it into this new way of working with families?
I think that our panelists are going to give us some wonderful examples of things that they've actually done. But I will say that when we're working with families virtually, it's so challenging to be able to do it because you're used to, right, interacting with families in one way. But I would really encourage people to start with asking open-ended questions and listening. A lot of times, especially during this pandemic and so many things that we're going through in our country right now, especially when you have families that are at home with children, they've had to become educators, they've had to become full-time, you know, parents, also still navigating a job perhaps, loss of income, dealing with COVID or illness in the family. There's so many dynamics. Some parents just want to be listened to. And
Right.
so honestly, you know, having a conversation with families and putting our own agendas aside, I know we all have them. We've got to get through that checklist of things that we really need to get to. But sometimes just listening to a family and finding out where they're coming from, what they're dealing with, is so helpful in understanding their perspective. And oftentimes, again, you know, we have shifting from prescription to perspective. We oftentimes go in assuming what a family's dealing with, or assuming what we know about a family based on their history or based on the paperwork that's in front of us. But oftentimes, if we just pause and carve out another, you know, an extra 15 minutes in that visit with them, to just listen and to connect on a level of humanity and saying, wow, I just understand. This is really challenging. Then you can get to some of those other pieces, the bigger pieces. And, you know, I love the saying that parents don't care, families don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so when you can connect with them and relate to them about what's going on in their home, what they're dealing with through all that we're facing, you can get to the next level of really being able to connect with them in a different way. But I think I've talked to people where they come often with their agenda first and trying to get through that checklist of, because they've got to get to the next family and they've got other things on, you know, as providers, we have things that we've got to get to. But that extra time really goes a long way.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dewana. Absolutely. Starting with listening is so important, right? So as we go on to the next portion of our slide, and thank you again, Dewana, for all of your wonderful information and just knowledge that you're sharing with us. I want to hear from you all out there in the virtual world and find out from you, of the things that we've discussed so far, what are some of the things that stand out to you that you could possibly use to engage with your families virtually today? So a lot of you have shared, you know, listening, understanding, having that perspective, putting our own biases, you know, checking those biases, validating feelings. Thank you so much for saying that. Reflective questioning, and taking the time to check in with families. Some of you have shared interactive Zoom sessions. So there's a lot of creativity out there already. I'm seeing this coming through in the chat, and I think it just speaks wonderfully of all of the different people that are so passionate about working with families and children and making sure that we are all providing a successful environment, right? Definitely building rapport is so important. And that's, again, something that we can do no matter the context, right? We can do that through Zoom. We can do that in an office. We can just get to know the families for who they are and what's important to them. And that's such an important part of building that relationship with them. So thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas through the chat. I do want to now take this opportunity to bring Nicole Faison on camera so she can share with us what her experience has been in terms of working with her families in the virtual context. Nicole, how are you?
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you for having me. This is great.
So we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what has been your experience working with children and families. And I know you've heard a lot of the conversation that we've had so far and some of the concerns that providers are having in terms of how do we address those challenges that we're facing, but also how do we continue to engage with families. So I'd love to hear from you about what your experience has been at this time.
Yeah, this has been great. I see the feedback from the chat session and have, see a lot of things that me and my staff are already doing on here. I can recall when this first started, COVID happened and the world shut down. Everybody kind of went into this disorganization and was like, what's next? What do we do? How do we regroup here? So it started out for my team by just kind of getting us together, right? Because in many times we tell families, like, unless the parent is okay, then, the children will also need to, that's how that works, right? So parallel process there going on. So we found as a team that we needed to kind of come together and just get some logistics out the way of how is this going to work, and technology during this time can either be your friend or not. And that is what we have all kind of learned during COVID. And in that, in engaging with families, we had to get resources and really understand that some of our families may not have had certain resources available to them during this time. Many people have either been laid off, not working, or just didn't have before the equipment to do some of the things that now we needed to do virtually with them. And this is all on top of that, adding on to online learning for many of our families, where they were now home with little ones and needing to do math that personally, I haven't seen in years. So it's like, okay. So I come from a home visiting background, and that is, what we do. And going into the homes was kind of me and my staff's thing. We could see the families in their own environment, and that was great. And during this time, it was now we needed to learn how to do that via a computer screen or the phone. We found that texting families, that worked really well, especially with our younger families. They enjoy texting more so than actually sitting on the phone with you. They could text you a book. I'm sure some people may have had this experience, and you would be able to reply back. So we have found that that has been very helpful for our younger families. And other families, phone calls have worked. Emails, we've even done emailing families at times that are maybe busier, or we have parents that are still trying to working through this whole COVID situation at home. So we can send large materials and things like that via email, which is nice for families to be able to have and just look at their own time, because as of now, we all know that there's not much time to do very much of anything. Even though we're all home, there still does not seem like enough time in the day. Video calls have been definitely a learning curve, I say, for all of us. I know some people have like Apple phones, and so they do the FaceTime. Others might have Samsung or something else. And so just trying to figure out, okay, which app can we use to connect? We use Zoom often with our families as well as other platforms maybe used during the time. And even that is a challenge because parents don't necessarily have sometimes the minutes to do these things. They don't have the internet connection. There's many challenges around that, right? And then also looking at the legal side of it, with HIPAA and how does that work, and being able for parents to sign a waiver saying, hey, I'm understanding that this is a potential breach of confidentiality and things like that. So really just trying to get all of that down on top of staying in touch with the family and connecting with them on the same level that we did previously has been probably the most challenging, I would say. Throughout this whole situation is how do we continue that connection with family, and how do we continue to teach and listen and view others' perspectives during this time with the families that we have been working with, and even new families who have come on. It's one thing to have families that we've known for a while now, but the new ones are the ones that are really like, whoa, like this is totally new. We don't know anything about them. They don't know anything about us, and building that connection to begin with. So, again, with that, really, we've said, let's do a video chat for that first meet if possible. And if not, okay, how else can we do this? We can talk on the phone. We can, ask some other questions, kind of pull out some more answers here. I think during this time, probably my staff and I have learned that asking questions and getting some clarity and, using reflection has been our saving grace here. And validating the family on the things that they are doing great and really playing up to their strengths has helped us during this time, and I feel has been able to help us keep the connection with our families, because it is a hard time for everyone. And even when families have maybe not contacted us in a while or have fallen off, and staff call me, or we have supervision and they say, oh my gosh, I haven't heard from this family in like 2 or 3 weeks, and what's going on? And, last time I heard, I know mom wasn't doing so well. And, and then maybe with her mental health or just food insecurities. So really us being able to sit back and kind of think about, okay, what could be going on right now with this family? And let's try and look at it through a different lens here. And why may parent not be calling you back right now? Maybe because they just need a break for themselves. And, maybe they don't know how to reach out. And so let's find out how we can get them to engage again. And so with that, texting has definitely helped. And just texting that, hey, just thinking about you, wanted to check in, want to know how's life, how are you doing? Especially
Absolutely.
now that parents may not have that adult talk, be able to talk to adults. If they're a single parent and they're in the house with children, it's nice to just have another adult to talk to at times.
Absolutely. Yes. I think there's been a couple of things that you've said, Nicole, that have stood out for me. And one of them has been the idea of validating your experience, right? We're all dealing with, it seems like it seems like it's the same thing, but our perspective on what we're facing every day might be different. And so really taking that into account and taking a step back and realizing my experience of this pandemic or insert X here might be very different from yours or the person next to me. And so taking that time to pause and really think about that. But also this idea that sometimes we just need to check in and we just need to get to know the family before we can go on and do our tasks, right? Like you mentioned, you have new families that are coming into your program. So you're just trying to get to know them, trying to figure out what they're about and who they are before you can really, get down to the work that you're doing together. So I do want to mention that our panelists did provide some information that's going to be used in a tip sheet that we'll be able to share. And a lot of this information that you mentioned, Nicole, was a part of that tip sheet. So I do want to make sure that our participants know that there is going to be something that you can refer to after today so you can also take a look at that. So thank you, Nicole, so much for sharing your experience with us. I do want to take an opportunity now to talk with Cristina and just find out a little bit about what she's been doing with the Educare work at Educare Los Angeles and Long Beach. I know that they've had a different experience, and I know that they have recently opened their center, and so hoping to learn a few ideas. I know this is giving us one perspective, but hopefully you will all see or hear yourselves in Cristina's thoughts and the information she's going to share with us. So take it away, Cristina. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. So I work at Educare Los Angeles at Long Beach. It's a preschool, and I'm a family support specialist. So my role basically consists of recruiting families, enrolling them, and then once they're here in the center, just being that source of support for them. So whether it's if they have any concerns about what's happening with their child in the school, or if they need access to resources. So I want to talk a little bit about what this experience has been from when we closed, and then through the process of being closed and then opening back up, just because there's been a lot of learning and reflection that has happened. But I think no matter whether you're providing services virtually or face-to-face, those best practices are always the same. So I remember when we first got notice that we would be shutting down, it was for 6 weeks at first. And then for myself, I felt really anxious about it when I heard of it. And I was really concerned for all of the families that we were working with. And immediately I was jumping to, what if they're working and they don't have the childcare? What if they lose their jobs? So just jumping to worst case scenario and just having a lot of anxiety with that. And then when that notice went out and families were coming to pick up their children, expecting for them to be in that panic mode and just being surprised by seeing how calm they were about it. So immediately for me, that was already an indication that I needed to stop and just reflect on. Just because I'm anxious and I'm feeling a certain way does not mean that everybody else is perceiving this in the same way. Or they might be anxious, but they might deal with it in a different way. So that was eye-opening. And then as we began to check in with families, it was also on my end just thinking, how is this going to work for them? What if they don't have access to the internet? Or what if we're contacting them too much and they get tired of hearing from us so often? So a lot of that also involved that reflection piece around, well, how can we use our resources to reach families, but then also work with the team that we have. So with teachers, if it's multiple people reaching out, how do we coordinate so that it's just either one person that's reaching out or just finding what works best for that family. And so that actually ended up working out well, but it did take a while of just coming together as a team and figuring out how are we going to reach out to the families. And then from there, it was a lot of sharing resources with families. So resources for food, diapers, what else, like rental assistance. And I think what we realized was that we were just sharing too much and families were just overwhelmed because they're already dealing with their kids being at home, trying to manage those schedules, whatever stress they're going through. And then on top of that, just receiving email after email and text call from us was just too much for them. And I think realizing that was important because it's not so much that they don't want to hear from us or that they don't care about our program, but more just, I have a lot going on right now. So if you could please just limit how much you're calling me at that moment. And I think for me, there was a particular experience where I really had to just sit back and think of, I guess, what I was bringing to this interaction with the family. So there's a family that I work with that I was particularly concerned about because their parents are undocumented. They don't have transportation, only dad works. So I was worried about when I found out that dad wasn't working anymore, how they were going to make ends meet. Yeah, just ensuring that they had the resources that they needed. And I would constantly send mom resources for, like, if you need diapers, you can go to this place. If you need rental assistance. And she would always reply just saying, thank you, thank you. And then I would check in with her and then she would tell me that she hadn't gone to receive that resource. So I was wondering, well, if you really need it, why haven't you gone out? So I thought, well, just ask. So I asked her, and in her case, it was just her anxiety around COVID itself and just not feeling comfortable leaving her house, leaving her household and not knowing what to do, like, should I take my kids? And for me and that woman, I figured, like, well, that's something that I can't solve for you, but I can talk with you about it. So we just talked about how I was also feeling anxious, what I was doing to take care of myself. And I think through that conversation, it was just feeling, or I guess realizing that mom, her concerns were different than mine. And so I needed to give her that time to just talk and share what she was going through before offering solutions that she probably did not need. And then eventually she did go out, she got her resources and she's doing well, but it was just realizing that what I was offering wasn't exactly what she needed at that time. And then from there too, I think in a lot of the conversations was just pointing out to families all the strengths that they were displaying. So for some families you would check in, they had multiple children, but they were saying, pretty much sharing how they were organizing their schedules, getting into a routine. So it was just stepping back and naming to that family, like, oh, wow, like I see that you have done really well at, for example, the family that comes to mind, they had 5 children. One of them was receiving speech services. So mom was advocating for her child to get those services. So just pointing out to her how great it was that she was able to manage having the 5 kids, their routines, and then still advocating for her son. Just because oftentimes you automatically do these things, but don't realize the strengths that you're displaying in that moment. And then also just thinking about once families we were getting ready to have them return to school again, it was the anxiety of, well, they're not going to want to come back. What are they going to think, like, of us wanting their children back in school? And then being surprised at realizing how many of our families were comfortable with coming back. And then again, just thinking I can't put my anxieties on them. Like, I might feel uneasy, but they feel okay, and that's fine. And then a lot of it was during those phone calls when we were recruiting. I think for the families that we already worked with, because they're familiar with us, they were comfortable coming back to the school. They felt safe. But for the new families, it was asking them, what concerns do you have at this time? And letting them lead with that conversation and then sharing what we were doing as a center to keep them safe. And then just coming back at the end of the conversation with, well, now how do you feel about your child coming? And whatever they felt, just validating it and reminding them that at the end of the day, they're the ones who are in control of what they want to do, whether they want to bring their child and try it out. And if it does not work out, that's fine. But I think a lot of it is just that taking the time to actually listen and then just stop and realize when you have a reaction or you want to share something, but it's more because of however you are feeling or processing things, and just realizing that it's not the same experience that the family is having, and giving them that space to share their concerns, and let them ask you what it is that they want or need in that moment. And I think so far that has been really helpful. And just when we came back to school, it was actually a really smooth transition for the families that were here. And I think a lot of it was just all of that work that was done behind the scenes.
Absolutely. There's definitely been, I think we're so used to having families show us a different way. And now that we're in a virtual context and we can't always see their, responses to how we are engaging, right? Like body language is different virtually versus in person. It can be, especially if you don't have a camera, if it's just via phone. And I think your story of your interaction with this mom who, you were just sharing so much and nothing was happening. It really reminds me that like it's so important to take a pause and really just stop and listen and really ask very specific questions about like, so what is really going on? What is it that you really need? And obviously it doesn't always come that way, right? Like we have to ask in so many different ways before we can get an answer. But I really love what you shared about your perspective taking and really thinking about, okay, what is happening? Is this me? Is this parent? Where is the disconnect here? And really, I think we probably have at some point all experienced some kind of that in our relationships, maybe with other providers, with other colleagues, in our own personal lives, and really just trying to, again, stopping to think about where's the mismatch? Why is this happening? And figuring out, okay, how do we recover from that? How do we come back and repair that so that we can keep going? So I think that was a beautiful example that sometimes it does feel like we could be working super hard, so much harder than this family, and why? But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like our job is to really find out what's underneath and really take the time to explore that and uncover that with the family. And there were some great comments about what you shared about, you can't solve this for the family, but you can definitely talk with them about it. And together that collaboration really pushes this relationship forward and gets you to the goal, right? It gets you to that place where you really need to be at. So like, okay, let's think about that together. We don't have to do it alone. Let's really partner with the family and figure out what is going on.
And
so thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead, Dewana.
Sometimes families, I think it's so true right now that they don't even know what they need. And we don't know what they need. And so having those conversations and just, I love what both Nicole and Cristina said, and just talking, and that's okay. We may ask them one day and they say, oh, I need X, Y, and Z, and that changes the next day because the priority has changed. It was food yesterday, but today actually I'm just trying to get out of bed. And so getting up to get food is moved to the bottom of the list. So just not knowing, I think in this time for all of us, and just sitting and talking it through together and figuring it out is half the battle.
Absolutely right. There was a comment here about servicing families with all their needs, and not just all their needs, but the ever-changing needs, right? That you mentioned day to day, hour by hour, sometimes it can change. So I really appreciate, Cristina, your thoughts and reflections on your experience. And I know we only have about 3 minutes left, so I want to tell you a little bit about what I know there's been a lot of questions about certificates and what comes next. So at the end of this webinar, within the next 24 hours, you will receive a survey link from us, a thank you email, just letting you know some post-webinar information. Once you complete the survey that is embedded in that email, you will get a link to the certificate, which I know a lot of you have been asking about. And there's also going to be the link to our learning community, which we will get to have and continue to have this conversation after today through a platform that's called Slack. So everyone that attended or registered for this webinar will have a link to that learning community where you can hear from us, from each other. I know there's been some great dialogue happening in the chat and some great resources and ideas shared. So you can continue to have that conversation, explore this topic, go deeper, ask more questions. But if other things are coming up, we can definitely look at those themes that are coming up and possibly engage in an ongoing conversation about other topics that are of interest to you or important to the work that you're doing every day. So I really want to thank you all for your participation, for sharing with us. And I also want to let you know about our upcoming webinars. As I mentioned, today was the first of a 6-part series. Next, in 2 weeks, we will have the next virtual service delivery webinar, which is partnering with families virtually. I know there was a lot of talk in the chat about groups and parent cafes and how do we do this virtually. So we're going to get to explore that topic a little bit more on August 5th. And then we also have another webinar series related to mental health that we'd love for you to join us at. It's starting August 6th. And so this is a 3-part series that's focusing on supporting mental health for the families that we're working with and ourselves, because we're all in this together and we're all doing the same work. So I want to make you aware of those. And also, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you in the learning community. Thank you, Nicole, Cristina, and Dewana, for all of your expertise and for being a part of this conversation today. And we hope to see you in a couple weeks. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.